Take a moment and jot down your answers to the entry question and discussion for today. What does patriotism mean to you? Do you think that it's important for people to be patriotic? Why or why not? Is it patriotic or anti-American to criticize the United States government? How about the president? When should protesters be considered criminal? In your opinion, what's the line? On the left is a picture of a woman holding a sign that says, Kaiser Wilson, have you forgotten your sympathy with the poor Germans because they were not self-governed? 20 million American women are not self-governed. Take the beam out of your own eye. This sign, like many other signs held by women's protesters outside the White House during World War I, is trying to point out President Wilson's hypocrisy. They call him Kaiser Wilson. Kaiser is the German word for emperor. And at the time, the German emperor was a man named Kaiser Wilhelm. And so they're trying to draw parallels between President Wilson and Kaiser Wilhelm. They say, have you forgotten your sympathy with the poor Germans? Remember that President Wilson said we were going to join World War I so that we could go abroad and make the world safe for democracy. And yet here in the United States, 50% of the population did not have the right to participate in our democracy. And the phrase, take the beam out of your own eye, basically stop being a hypocrite. Is this woman being anti-patriotic? Is it okay that she is criticizing the United States government, specifically the president, during war? Today we're going to learn about sedition. The American doughboys, as they were called, are the American men and sailors that enlisted to join World War I. In 1917, the United States enters the war after the Zimmerman Note is intercepted and the Lusitania is sunk. The United States has a small army with just over 10,000 men, but in 1 year, we were able to grow that to 5 million men. The United States troop helps to decisively end the European stalemate. A big question that a lot of historians have asked is, did our involvement in World War I violate the Monroe Doctrine, where we said that we would stay out of European affairs if they stayed out of ours? And here we are directly interfering and actually throwing the balance on the side of the Allies in this war. Warfare in Europe for the early part of World War I had been pretty much a stalemate because of the use of a new system of warfare called trench warfare. This warfare had evolved. No longer did we just simply march at each other in lines like we did in the Civil War. We dug trenches and found more strategic ways to protect ourselves from the heavy artillery and machine weapons that we had at this time. Men dug trenches to barricade themselves from enemy fire, and we developed something, sort of continued the development of something known as no man's land. In trench warfare, the defender of territory had the advantage because anybody that wanted to take territory had to come out of their trench, run across no man's land, and be able to take over another trench. And this was really hard to do, and so in World War I, there was basically just a standoff, and Germany was unable to continue to take territory into France and elsewhere. Another major issue and type of warfare used in World War I is chemical weapons. This was widely used. It caused many casualties and long-term health defects. The most commonly used were tear gas and mustard gas. Lethal chemical agents that were used were phosgene gas and chlorine gas. All of these caused severe issues, and were really problematic for a lot of the men that were fighting. Many of them would have neurological issues following a chemical weapon attack. And because of this, chemical weapons were banned from use in warfare after World War I. Most recently, chemical weapons were used in Syria during the Syrian civil war, and the UN got involved and stepped in and basically banned the use of it. And the United States, with some of the UN officials, went in and searched and seized all the chemical weapons and destroyed them. Some key events in this war. In 1914, war breaks out in Europe. Germany defeats Russia in the Battle of Tannenberg. France halts Germany's attack in the Battle of the Marne. An unofficial truce is declared on the Western Front on Christmas Eve, actually, and the soldiers sing together. This is actually a pretty significant event in World War I. Most of the people on both sides of this war are Christian and know all the same Christmas carols, and so when one side started playing Christmas carols on bagpipes and otherwise, the other side heard them and crossed over no man's land to sing with them and celebrate. The next day, they actually purposely missed each other, and they were all punished by their respective generals and sent to more dangerous locations in the war. But it's kind of an interesting, peaceful moment to show that there are some things bigger than war. There was a major naval battle of Jutland, which had no clear victory, and most of the victories in World War I were fought on land. In 1916, President Wilson is reelected for keeping the United States out of the war, and in 1917, he takes us into the war. This is a major event. 1917, the Bolsheviks overthrow Russia and established a communist government. The British, in sort of a personal imperial ambition, take over Jerusalem from the Ottoman Empire. Some of their big goals during World War I were to obtain oil and protect their oil interests. In 1918, Austria-Hungary collapses. The German Kaiser Wilhelm gives up his throne, and in 1919, a peace treaty is signed. So, what is sedition? Sedition is rebellion or civil disorder. There's a group known as the American Socialist Party. Between 1900 and 1910, they had a man named Eugene Debs run for president in each election. They didn't often do very well. Third parties usually don't. Think Green Party or Libertarian Party, etc. today. The American Socialist Party didn't do very well, but their best showing ever for a socialist ticket was in 1912 when Debs gained 6% of the popular vote. Eugene Debs was a labor activist, a socialist, and he staunchly opposed the United States' involvement in World War I. In 1917, President Wilson signed into law the Espionage Act. This sign helps to point out some of the hypocrisy of the Espionage Act. It says, "Mr. President, remember the Constitution? Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or the press. The political prisoners who believed in this guarantee are now serving 20 years in prison." So, what does this act prohibit? It prohibits support of U.S. enemies during wartime. So, anybody that was a traitor to our country and gave support to Germany could be charged under the Espionage Act. Promoting insubordination in the military, and interfering with military recruitment. So, anybody that burned a draft ticket or anything like that could be charged under the Espionage Act. In 1919, the United States Supreme Court unanimously ruled that the act did not violate freedom of speech. So, whether you like it or not, this act is in law. And the act is still controversial today. The Sedition Act of 1918 extended the Espionage Act. Some consider it an amendment to the Espionage Act. The Sedition Act prohibited speech and the expression of opinion that views the war effort negatively. So, this political cartoon here, where this big snake represents the sedition bills or the Sedition Act, here you can see the small children, free press, free speech, and honest opinion are being eaten up by this big snake. In World War I, there was a great deal of sedition. Radicals claimed that big business was controlling the government's decision to enter the war. The government was entering the war to make money on building war materials, and felt strongly that we should not be involved in war for these reasons, that these were not just causes to intervene in war. Radicals were round up. The political cartoon here says, "I pledge allegiance and silence about the war." Basically noting the hypocrisy and sort of the patriotism of the era. So, online we have a sedition activity for you to do. There are two parts to this activity. The first is looking at documents A and B and completing the first part of the organizer. You'll then read documents A and B and complete the second part of the organizer. I have one slide for you to look at after you have read documents A and B and completed the organizers. And then after that, you can read documents C and D and complete the questions. So, Eugene Debs and Schneck. Both Debs and Schneck were arrested for breaking the law, found guilty, and sentenced to jail time. Debs served 32 months in prison until President Harding released him in 1921. Schneck spent 6 months in prison. His case was argued in the Supreme Court, Schneck v. United States. He argued that his freedom to speech was violated. And so a big thing that you need to think about based on documents A and B is whether or not Debs and Schneck broke the law. Were their speeches that they gave unpatriotic? And should they be punished? So take a look at documents C and D. Document C is the act itself, and document D is the Supreme Court's decision.